Krishna everyone. So we'll have Bhagavad Gita class now. We'll start off with a quick Radhamadava, Jai Radhamadava. Thank you Prabhu for leading Kirtan for now, but we'll keep it short. And I'd love if you can stay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivraj Kacharya Shtotra Shatra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Ki Shri Shri Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman Ki Shri Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Srila Prabhupada Ki Janitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. So thank you all for being present, whether that's in person here or online. Really grateful for your time. Today we'll be reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, which is the perfection of renunciation. Does anybody need a Bhagavad Gita? Are you okay? Say again? Okay. No problem. Well, you can hear what we speak about. So yes, chapter 18 is perfection of renunciation. Today we're reading text 63. So before we get into it, just going to recite some prayers. We'll do lead and response. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Right. Reading from text 63. So we'll go line by line and you can repeat after me. Iti te jnanam akyatam guhyat guhyataram maya vimrishyetad asheshena yatechasi tatakuru. Iti te jnanam akyatam Guhyat guhyataram maya Vimrishyetad asheshena Yatechasi tatakuru iti te jnanam akyatam guhyat guhyataram maya vimrishyetad asheshena yatechasi tata kuru. Would you like to lead, Prabhu? Iti te jnanam akyatam guhyat guhyataram maya vimrishyetad asheshena yatechasi tata kuru. So we'll just go to the word by word translations. Iti, thus. Te, unto you. Jnanam, knowledge. Akyatam, described. Guhyat, than confidential. Guhyataram, still more confidential. Maya, by me. Vimrishya, deliberating. Etat, on this. Asheshena, fully. Yatha, as. Ichhasi, you like. Tatha, that. Kuru, perform. So we can also just do the translation. So I'll read it once and then we can do it in sections. Thus, I have explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do. Thus, I have explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully and then do what you wish to do. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki, Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki, Shri Shri Gaurnitai ki Jai. So, reading from the purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki. The Lord has already explained to Arjuna the knowledge of Brahma Bhuta. One who is in the Brahma Bhuta condition is joyful. He never laments, nor does he desire anything. That is due to confidential knowledge. Krishna also discloses knowledge of the Supersoul. This is also Brahman knowledge, knowledge of Brahman, but it is superior. Here, the words Yatechasi tata kuru, as you like, you may act, indicate that God does not interfere with the little independence of the living entity. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord has explained in all respects how one can elevate his living condition. The best advice imparted to Arjuna is to surrender unto the Supersoul seated within his heart. By right discrimination, one should agree to act according to the order of the Supersoul. That will help one become situated constantly in Krishna consciousness, the highest perfectional stage of human life. Arjuna is being directly ordered by the personality of Godhead to fight. Surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is in the best interest of the living entities. It is not for the interest of the Supreme. Before surrendering, one is free to deliberate on this subject as far as the intelligence goes. That is the best way to accept the instruction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such instruction comes also through the spiritual master, the bona fide representative of Krishna. So before we share something, we'll just request the blessings of the previous acharyas. I'll recite some prayers. Please feel free to join if you know them. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurun militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you once again for being here today, whether that's in person or online. So as I mentioned, this text is part of chapter 18, which is entitled The Perfection of Renunciation. So it's one of the longest chapters in the Bhagavad Gita. And so Krishna in this chapter, as this is the last chapter, he's concluding all the instructions he's giving. But at the same time, he gives a lot of information here. So earlier in this chapter we saw he describes different things according to the three modes of nature. So that's goodness, passion, and ignorance. So that just tells us that anything that we do can be done in different states of consciousness. So in earlier verses, he described renunciation in the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Then he went on to describe knowledge, action, the worker in these different types of mode, how can classify our understandings, determination, and ultimately he describes happiness in the three different modes. After that, he goes on to describe the qualities of the different varnas. So what are the qualities that a brahmana should live by? What are the qualities of a kshatriya? And what are the qualities of a vaishya and a shudra? And then he goes on to explain how everyone, so regardless of what your varna is or your ashram, whether you're a student or married life or retired, whatever your position in life, how can we attain perfection? And ultimately, how can we achieve the Supreme Brahman? And then in just the preceding verses to this one, he describes the position and the attitude of a devotee. So in this verse, let's break it down line by line. So he starts off by saying, Iti te jnanam akyatam. So this line means, thus I have given to you this knowledge. So as I mentioned, he's already, not just in the 18th chapter, he's throughout the entire Gita, he's given a lot of knowledge. Whether that's, so that they say the entire Gita is you can classify it into 5 key themes. So that's karma, kala, which means time, jiva, which is us, the living entity, Ishvara, and prakriti, so God, and then the material nature that we are here in. So he's given a lot of knowledge. And then he goes on to say, Guhyad guhyataram maya. The most confidential, so the confidential of the most confidential. So not only is it confidential, but it's the most confidential. So he's really highlighting its confidential knowledge. So what can we understand from this? Like, if you start to see the instructions that is given so far from chapter 2, where he describes us as the living entity, that we're not this body, but we're the spirit soul. Why is that confidential? I mean, in the secular world, how often do we hear that? When we go to school, college, nobody really tells us that actually we're the soul. We all operate on this basis that actually we're the body and we should be doing everything for this body. Later on, he goes on to describe who is God, and in his form as Paramatma, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hrideshu Arjuna Tishtati. So he describes that there's a super soul within us. We're the soul, but there's also a super soul within the heart. He goes on to describe the 3 different modes. So all these things, like, we generally just don't hear anywhere in the material world. So that's why it's classified as confidential knowledge. So once we get this knowledge, then he goes on to say, Vimrishyetat asheshena. Deliberate on this fully. So again, why is this important? So if we just take the word vimrishya, the actual etymology of it means touch the intelligence. So we have the body, then we have a mind, then we have the intelligence. So if we're just operating on the position of the mind, the business of the mind is constantly to accept or to reject, sankalpa or vikalpa. But on what basis is the mind making those decisions whether to accept or reject? Like right now, you've chosen to be here in this class. Nobody forced you. So that's an example of you accepting that I want to be here. But without deliberation, we'll only act on sentiment, because then there's no element of intelligence. There's one pastime of Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya. There was many, in the early days of the Krishna consciousness movement, people were very interested in what he had to share. And so people wanted to, really take to this process. So one time somebody came up to him and said, Prabhupada, I want to get initiated. Just on the first day, in the first meeting of Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada said, today you have come by sentiment, and tomorrow you may leave by sentiment. So that goes on to show that actually, unless we deliberate things fully, what we do will just be very fleeting, very, very temporary. So that's why it's important to use our intelligence. And intelligence actually requires using in-depth analysis of what we have in front of us. There's a difficulty of sharing knowledge. So generally what we try to do throughout the year is share this knowledge with other people, whether that's in the form of these classes or we go out on the streets as well to try and share this knowledge. And sometimes we come across people who may already have the Bhagavad Gita at home, pious Hindus. And when you try to share this knowledge with them, a lot of time what we hear is, yes, I already know this, So it's almost like there's a block. I don't want to hear from you. I already know these things. But most of the time, people haven't even read the Gita. Yes, you may have a Bhagavad Gita at home, but are you actually making use of it? Because, as I said, there's a lot of confidential knowledge in this. And then even if people may have read it, are people actually following in the way that Krishna wants us to understand this knowledge? So in the Gita he says, Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo vidu sakalene hamahat yoganashta parantapa. So this supreme knowledge is to be understood through the disciplic succession. But actually most people don't even know that there's a parampara. And then in the Puranas it says, Tad vigyanartham gurum sa eva abhigachet. So in order to actually learn this knowledge, we have to approach a spiritual master and inquire from them submissively. A lot of times, and I've definitely been guilty for this, you approach somebody who's quite knowledgeable, and the first thing that you want to do is just ask for blessings. And it's quite admirable because we recognize the value of blessings. But for most people, what are those blessings for? Is it to actually try to understand what this knowledge is, or is it just that so I can do better in my material life? So that kind of pushes us that even when we're in the company of saintly souls, are we asking the right questions? Are we approaching them in the right mood? Sometimes, again, very guilty of this. We may have read the Bhagavad Gita in the disciplic succession just as Krishna wants us, but then we may think, actually, I should read something else. The Bhagavad Gita is now, very beginners. But actually, Krishna says, Susukam kartum avyayam. So this knowledge is, when it's performed, it's supremely joyful. So regardless of how many times you hear it, it should be that you relish hearing it more and more. It's never you feel like, I've already heard this, One of the instructions Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita so frequently is that we're not this body. And over time, we may get bored. Okay, I know that I'm not this body, and what's next? But actually, do we actually really understand what it means that I'm not this body? So that's why these instructions are constantly repeated. So that's why we have to hear again and again, that's really for us. Arjuna, who is the recipient of this knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita in the Battle of Kurukshetra, he heard it once and he achieved perfection. But we're not Arjuna. We're not on that stage or that platform. And that was in Dwapara Yuga, when it was much easier to understand this knowledge. We're in Kali Yuga, and Kali Yuga is described, the people in Kali Yuga are described as Manda Sumanda Matayo Manda Bhagya Upadrita. So people are lazy, misguided, unfortunate. So all these qualities are innately within us in this age. So that's why we have to really work harder to overcome them. So what does this hearing actually show us? Once we come to the platform of accepting that, yes, this knowledge is useful for me, we can understand that there is this cycle of birth and death and old age and disease. In the Srimad Bhagavatam is described that in this world, padam padam vipadam natesham. So in every step there is danger. And we can see that, sometimes people say, I don't want to live in this country because, the risks are much higher. There's so much more robbery or shooting, all these kind of things. But actually, who's not to say that we may step out on the streets of London and the same thing couldn't happen to us. So in every step there is danger. But at the same time, Krishna gives us a solution. He says, and that leads us to the last instruction of this verse, Yate chasi tata kuru. So deliberate on this fully and then decide what you want to do. So he's not forcing us to take on this knowledge. He's given us this knowledge because he understands our plight. He can see that we're suffering in this world. But the platform of love, there's never any force. And that's the platform that Krishna is operating on. He's giving us this knowledge, and he's doing it out of compassion because he knows that we can benefit from it. And in the verse, Prabhupada in the purport says, this is for our benefit, not for Krishna's benefit. So now Krishna gives Arjuna a choice. I've given you all this knowledge before this battle. Now you have to make that decision of what you want to do. And the same, we have the same choice. We may come to the temple, we may hear from different sources, but nobody's forcing us to act on this knowledge. That has to ultimately come from ourselves, because Krishna recognizes that we are independent. Otherwise, there's no question of love. So if we have this independence, then what he's doing is appealing to our intelligence. Here's the knowledge. Please act in a way you think is best. In the world, we can't really sway others. We can't force people to do what we want them to, and neither should we. But what we can try to do is inspire them. If we try to force people to do something, yes, sometimes people may do a certain thing for a short period of time, but it will never last. And sometimes what we find is actually it can drive people to do the opposite of what we want them to do, because, who wants to be forced to do someone else's will, right? So what does it mean to be inspired There's a kind of a clue in the word, from inside. If someone feels like doing something, they'll naturally do it. A good example is that of a child. I don't know if you have children yourselves, but I've got a 5-year-old niece, and sometimes, if they're acting naughty, like children have a particular nature, and you just constantly feel like saying to them, no, don't do this instead, and then the child feels like, why is the parent forcing me to do this all the time, and suddenly they become a bit more rebellious. But actually, if we inspire them to act in a certain way, then we don't need to force them or tell them to do something in a particular way, because in this example, and inspiring them would mean giving them a knowledge, saying, actually, if you act in this way, then this is going to happen, but if you act in this way, then actually you may benefit. And then you give that choice to the child. What decision do you want to make? Because then they understand the consequences of their actions. So that's like a very kind of high-level example of inspiration, but that example I find personally very inspiring, because actually we're in the same position. When this knowledge is explained with an understanding of what are the consequences, what is the benefits of actually doing it, then we can make an informed choice. And in the example of the child, that will encourage the child to act more responsibly in the long run. So here's an opportunity to reflect for ourselves. Why are we doing what we're doing on a daily basis? It is described by Jiva Goswami in the Bhakti Sandarbhas that there are 3 types of faith. So the first faith is called Lokika Shraddha. This is like a cultural or worldly faith. So you're kind of following something just because someone else may be doing it, or this is how you may have been brought up, or because lots and lots of people are doing it. So this is kind of like you doing it because people around you are doing it. The next stage above that is called Baladuta Padita Shraddha. So this is like a forced faith, but by forced I mean something like, someone may be given a speech and it may be very charismatic and we may feel inspired by that, but it's just because of them, not necessarily because what they're saying makes sense. Also, sometimes preachers can fall into this bucket. And then the last is Tattvika Shraddha. And this is the highest type of faith because it's based on intelligent understanding, based on a proper understanding, and is much more grounded. So in every choice, every activity that we do, we can ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Which type of faith am I practicing when I'm doing this particular activity? So even it could be something as mundane as I go to work, but am I doing it because everyone else is doing it, or is this something that I naturally actually believe in, or is there a higher understanding that yes, this is gonna this is fulfilling for me. Obviously, that's a much higher level, but it could even be just like, yeah, this is what I need to earn the bread. So in every situation, we can question ourselves, which level of faith am I acting on? But going back to the point of inspiration, inspiration is when we combine energy with intellect. So as I was saying, when we feel like doing something, that feeling is on the emotional platform. And then when that's in touch with our intellectual, then that becomes inspiration. So to give another example of how knowledge can expand our vision, if you think of, I don't know how many of us actually drive, but if, say you're driving on the road, you may not necessarily see everything in front of you, but there's certain road signs that can give us an indication of what's to come. So take an example is a speed bump. We may not necessarily see a speed bump because there may not be any road markings or, it may just the road elevation may be a certain way. But seeing that sign that a speed bump is upcoming actually expands our vision. So in a similar way, the Gita is giving us a sign like that. It is expanding our vision without us necessarily having to see everything in front of us. And it can help us to understand what are the consequences of what are my actions, and that's where karma comes in. So if we act according to a certain way, then these are the results that I'm going to get. And that is basically a very basic way of expanding our vision beyond what we see directly in front of us. And Krishna says, if we act according to his plan, then he protects us. In the 3 verses just behind this one, Sarvadhamam parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. He says, if you just follow what I say, then I will protect you from all sinful reactions. Krishna also says in preceding verses, in 59, if we think we cannot act, then actually we're under illusion, because every single moment we're acting. But then we can ask ourselves, on what basis am I acting? What is the desire behind my activity? So is it something that I'm consciously doing, or is it something that I'm just riding a wave? And to give an example of this wave, say if you're swimming in the ocean, you may be trying to get back to the shore, but if a big wave comes, it kind of just drags you out to sea. So in a similar way, if you think about that example, are you actually making a conscious effort to swim a certain way, or are you just being dragged by the waves? So our desires can be like that sometimes. Sometimes we may want a desire in a particular way, but because of whether that's people around us or our conditioning over lifetimes, we may just find ourselves actually acting in a way that we may think, well, that's not what I really wanted to do. Just think for ourselves, right? How many times have been in situations that why did I do that? So again, it's just about questioning and understanding, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's a really powerful meditation on a constant basis. Just trying to recognize what is it that we're acting, on what basis are we acting? And if we don't, going on that example or the analogy of the ocean, if we don't anchor ourselves, then we'll find that constantly we're being swept away by the waves. So again, we can ask ourselves, what am I using as my anchor? What is it that's going to ground me so that when the waves come, I don't just get swept away? So then I know what are my actual desires. Because most of the time, we don't even know why we desire certain things that we do desire. There's one pastime of Srila Prabhupada. This one Indian gentleman came to him and he said, I've read the entire Gita and I really like it. So Prabhupada asked him, is there a particular section that you really like? So actually this same gentleman said, 1863, this verse that we're reading, and why did he really like that? Because the last instruction, Yate chasi tata kuru, do as you like. But obviously he was very, it's interesting that he highlighted that, but not the line before, deliberate fully and then act. But, people just want to do what they want to do. They don't want to understand actually, why am I doing what I'm doing? So we see in the modern world, on going along the same theme of desires, sometimes we burden people with expectations. Most people don't even realize that they have these expectations. Good example of understanding some of the unspoken expectations we have. Say you're walking down the street and you see somebody drop their wallet on the street, right? So I can appreciate most of us are very honest, genuine people. And so the natural reaction to that would be to pick up the wallet and give it back to that person. Now imagine in that situation that you've given the wallet back, the person takes it and then just carries on about their day. What's going through your mind after you've just given that wallet back and they don't say anything? Any thoughts? Say again? He's stealing money. No, the wallet belongs to him. So you're just giving it back. Yeah. But why is that the case? Like, ultimately the money belonged to him, right? But you gave it back to him, which is the right thing to do. But then he just walks off. Yeah. But how many of us actually speak that there's this expectation that we have of gratitude? I mean, it's an unspoken expectation. It's not an unrealistic expectation. But this is just a very small example of all the different unspoken expectations we carry on a day-to-day basis. So this is just a very crude example of highlighting that. But there's so many that we carry. And in relationships, the number one reason why most relationships break, whether that's conjugal relationships or friendships, is because of expectations. Expectations which are unmet causes relationships to really become strained. And in the context of conjugal relationships, most of these expectations are hidden or uncommunicated in the beginning. So, when a boy and a girl get together, in the beginning they just think, I'm the one for you, you're the one for me, and everything's going to work out. Again, why is that the case? Because people aren't really communicating what are their expectations. And over time, these become more apparent and they start to become a burden. And in the beginning, we're just deceiving ourselves. Actually, I don't actually really have any expectations. So it's really important to understand what those expectations are. Otherwise, in relationship, we start off with, I can't live without you. And over time, it becomes, I can't live with you. And we don't want that, right? And so that's the beauty of Krishna's instruction, do as you wish. So in the 3 verses before this, and then in the 3 verses after this, Krishna says, that we must surrender. So why is it that we emphasize surrender so much? Like in the material world, surrender has a very negative connotation, right? Like it's associated with, put your hands up, surrender, or something like that. But why do we in the spiritual circles glorify it so much? Actually, Krishna explains that this is our real nature, to surrender. This is the nature of the soul. Because we don't identify with the soul, we identify with the body. So, we're operating on the platform of I, me, mine, aham, mameti. And that's why this is contrary to that, to the principle of surrender. But what we don't understand is actually we're a very, very minute particle of Krishna. And by being so small, that makes us very dependent by nature. So this is why the nature of the soul is dependent and our activities to actually surrender and serve. So when Krishna says, just surrender unto me, all he's asking us to do is just be yourself, because actually who is the real self? It's that spirit soul. But Krishna in this verse also says, don't do it blindly, because who wants blind surrender? Blind surrender is just as bad as blind faith. He's asking us in this verse, do it willingly, do it with understanding. And that's why, Krishna understands that actually surrender is very difficult. He could have started the entire Bhagavad Gita by saying, just surrender unto me. But that wouldn't really have inspired us, right? If the first conversation you have with somebody just says, surrender unto me, we'll be like, get out of here. So that's why Krishna then gives all that knowledge gives us the understanding by which we can actually surrender, and then says, I've given you this knowledge, now do what you think is best. So one of the contrary of this instruction is, Arjuna perfectly displays it in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. He starts off, the Bhagavad Gita starts off by Arjuna saying, I am completely bewildered, so I surrender unto you. So he's already displaying that surrender in the beginning because he's in the position where I just don't know what to do. But he adds a condition. I don't know what to do, but I will not fight. And so that's where most of us have certain elements of surrender within us. But we have conditional surrender. We say to Krishna, I'll do this, but I also want this. Like even sometimes when we approach the deities, when we come for darshan, we may be thinking, Krishna, I surrender unto you, but I really want that car, or I want this nice house, or this relationship, or there's so many things we're looking for from God, but that's not really surrender because there's conditions to that. But what Krishna wants is unconditional surrender, and as long as we realize and act on that basis, that is completely necessary for us, then we'll continue to just go around in this vicious cycle of birth, old age, disease, death. And so how do we know when we come to that final stage of surrender? What are we all ultimately looking for? Anybody want to shout anything that we're ultimately looking for? Happiness. Any other thoughts? Love. Friendship. Peace. Nice. So all these things, every activity that we do, it is trying to achieve these things, right? Whether it's happiness, peace, our daily activities are all based on what can I do to achieve these things. And so Srila Prabhupada once described real surrender in a really beautiful way. He said, surrender means that I have tried different solutions to all the problems of life. So I may have tried yoga, I may have tried meditation, I may have tried astrology, I may have tried, you name it. Everything has been tried. And only when you realize that surrendering to Krishna is the solution, that is when you can define that you are surrendered. So this is a really nice point. And again, on the principle that Krishna says, I have given you this knowledge, now deliberate on this fully. I think that's a nice place to end this class. We may get all this knowledge from different sources, but ultimately it's up to us what we do with that knowledge. So I thank you all for listening and giving me an opportunity to speak, and ask if there's any questions that anybody wanted to raise, or any comments, any clarifications. Please.
I was thinking that if we just bring up this point of deliberation, in Arjuna's eyes, he had fully deliberated in the first chapter. He had thought about all the viewpoints about why not to fight, in terms of compassion and unwanted project like
Yes.
bloodshed and all this. So I was thinking that in his eyes, he has fully deliberated, but in Krishna's eyes, he had not even begun to deliberate because he's still on this bodily platform, thinking of I, me, mine. So I was thinking that full deliberation by ourselves may be incomplete, but full deliberation with help of divine intervention may be.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So just to repeat your question to make sure I've understood it, you were saying that Arjuna, in one sense, in the first chapter, fully deliberated on the basis of I, me, mine. And, he understood that if this battle was to take place, then there'll be bloodshed, unwanted progeny, etc. But in Krishna's eyes, he hadn't fully deliberated. So how do we reconcile, is that higher guidance needed, right? Yes, you raise a very good point in that sometimes we may think that on my own basis I can deliberate, and it certainly gets us far, and there's an element of super soul within the heart. Krishna says, Ishvara sarabhutanam hrideshwara junatishtati. So Krishna is there in our heart. But how much are we actually in tune with the Paramatma within? Because a lot of times when we deliberate, we're doing on the basis of our mind. As I said, that is based on the mind takes guidance from the intellect. And if we don't furnish our intellect with understanding what is the right thing or wrong thing to do, then that deliberation becomes almost futile. So, yes, in furnishing the intelligence, and that's comes through obtaining knowledge, is very important. But it shouldn't only be so. Like it says, it is said that we can take a 3-step stage process with which to understand what is the right thing that we should ultimately do, and that's Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. So Shastra helps us to furnish this intelligence, but there's sadhus, the other practitioners, other saintly people, who also we can understand, by their example, what is the right thing to do. And ultimately, we have Guru to consult, to understand actually, whether that specific things in life, which course of action should I take in a particular situation, or in general, how should I lead my life? Guru is certainly a port of call for that. So yeah, I would say that these 3 stages are very important to understand and to help us to deliberate fully. Thank you for your question. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we'll end here. Darshan will be in the next 5 minutes, so thank you all for being here today. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai.
Centers are very organized. We're definitely thinking about resources and devotees who are being with them. Yeah. So what do you need to do? Hadai. Hadai is the father of life. So Pran means life. Yeah. So life of Hadai is Mikhail. Only calculus. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. In 2 minutes. Oh yeah. January 2.
Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Satya
obeisances. We'll say some prayers, and after every prayers, we'll end with ki, and then everybody responds is Jai. Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parirajagacharya Astotra Sada Shri Srimad अभय चरणारविंद भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राज का आचार्य अस्वतंत्र सदस्य श्रीमान भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती ठाकुर महाराज प्रभुपाद की अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की नाम आचार्य शिला हरिदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की श्री वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की श्री नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की श्री पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की श्री गंगा माई यमुना माई भक्ति देवी की श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी की समवेत गौर भक्त वृंद की निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Guru Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Now we will have one more prayer. It is called the Nrsimha prayers. Nrsimhadev Bhagavan is pictured right there. So please stay around, and then after that there will be prasad.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. की गौर प्रेमानंदे
Next Arti will be at 9 p.m. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.